This is the last day of the June 87 7-day retreat. And we will read today from two sources. One is a book by Vimala, Takar, called Towards Total Transformation. This book is published by the Friends of Vimala Takar in USA, Berkeley, California, 1970. It's a series of transcriptions of talks given at, the one we are reading from is given at Stanford University in 1968. Someone lent me the book during the last retreat, maybe to read from during the last talk, and people found it so good that I'll read some more from it today. Some people asked afterwards who had never heard of her, who is she? So I'll say a few words. She's an Indian-born woman who for a long time worked in the land gift movement. I've forgotten the name, it's quite famous because quite a number of people from countries all over are working in it and learning from it. She traveled around India giving lectures and helping out in villages. When she came upon the teachings of Krishnamurti, she went to talks for several years and had many private meetings with him, and then at one point left her previous work completely and is now devoting her time to traveling around the world, talking to people wherever she's invited, and also holding retreats, which I don't know much about, but there are lots of books by her because they're everywhere. Some people who publish, transcribe and publish her talks. She is not beholden to any religion, doctrine, ideology, nationality. And then as a last thing, I want to read the last chapter from a book called Truth and Actuality. It's just 2 paragraphs by Krishnamurti. This taping here will not be available for people to buy. I'm just picking up a small talk of hers which followed a question. This is a question period after a series of talks, and this is part of an answer to a question. I think the questioner who hadn't been to the talks wanted to have some summary of what she had said. Is man doomed to live in the bondage of his own knowledge and experience? The content of man's knowledge and experience is really the only objective bondage. There's no other bondage from which one has to set oneself free. People feel that for attaining freedom, for becoming liberated, living in nirvana or satori or what you will, one has to run away from the house and away from the family and go to some cave, forest, monastery, ashram or whatnot. Go where you will carry the mind with you. You will carry the content of your knowledge and experience with you. That knowledge and experience will color your perception. It will dictate the nature of your response. The mind, which is the product of the collective humanity, the product of society, will accompany you to the cave. It will be there. It seems to me that this giving up of things in the so-called objective world, or this running away from the situations in which one is born, is really an unscientific and outmoded way for discovering truth. It is unwarranted in this age of science. What is warranted is something quite different. What is warranted is trying to transcend the content of psyche and finding out if there is any other dimension to our consciousness. Is all of our consciousness exhausted by the conscious, the subconscious, and the unconscious, which has been explored, mapped, and charted out for us? Is that the only consciousness for us? Is there anything beyond? That is the basic challenge. Now, as one is looking for experiences, one is on the mental plane. Whether I'm looking for an experience through the senses, or I'm looking for an extrasensory experience, whether I'm looking for an occult experience, or I'm looking for a transcendental experience, I, as an entity, the ego, the self, the me, wants to continue and sustain himself through experiencing. The ego, the self, the me, the I consciousness is really sustained only through experiencing. The moment there are no new experiences for the I, the ego, it feels bored. So the ego is always hunting for experiences, if not in the material world, at least in the intellectual world. And if ideas, ideologies, and theories do not attract the mind, then it goes to the extrasensory, the occult, and transcendental world. But the ego always hunts for experiences. It lives through experiencing. Experiencing is acquiring a new sensation, acquiring a new way of adjusting that experience to the whole being, to the totality of my life. So long as I want to have an experience, it is really an ego-centered activity. I may stimulate the whole being through some biochemical action of drugs. I may pacify and soothe certain brain cells through chanting certain words. I'm trying to create an impact on the brain, or I'm trying to stimulate the brain cells to get a new variety of experience. Psychedelic experiences are experiences which people may arrive at through expanding the scope of consciousness, for receiving sensations, through heightening the sensitivity, so that the intensity of experience is 100 times more than the ordinary state of consciousness. I have not taken the drug, so I don't know. I may be wrong. But I have understood that these drugs, these chemicals heighten the sensitivity. Generally, we live in a very dull state of our being, and we pass through experiences half-heartedly, absent-mindedly, with a distracted mind. We do not live with a deep passion to go through every experience, through every moment of life intensively. We live perhaps intensively in the rare moments of love. Otherwise, we are floating on the surface consciousness, passing through experiences without living totally any of them. I would like to say that in the state of meditation there is no scope for any experiences or any experiencing. The state of meditation is a state of consciousness in which every mental action ceases to be. The mind is completely silent. It is not moving in any direction. The ego, the self, is in complete abeyance. It is not eliminated. You cannot eliminate the past, the memory. You cannot destroy the ego. People who have tried to kill the memory, benumb the ego, paralyze the action of the ego, mutilate their consciousness. They do not arrive at transcendence of the psyche. The mind has all the talents and capacities intact. Everything is there. And yet the mind is not moving. There is a total cessation of mental activity. That is real meditation. What does that mean? The mind does not move. The mind does not think, feel, or react. What does that mean? Does it not mean that the energy which was running in different directions, which was divided into contradictory desires, conflicting intentions and ambitions, which was scattered in all directions, comes back to its origin? This is something which one can really experiment with. All the vital energy which was scattered in reacting emotionally or intellectually, every thought verbalized or unverbalized, every emotion manifest or unmanifest, the slightest movement of the mind causes expenditure of vital energy. Every thought, every feeling disturbs the rhythm of breathing and the rhythm of blood circulation. Every thought, noble or ignoble, every feeling, virtuous or otherwise, disturbs or gives a jerk to the whole chemistry of the body. But when the mental action ceases to be, there is perfect rhythm. There is a harmony in the rhythm of blood circulation, the digestive process, the glandular, the muscular, the nervous system, all are in a harmonious state of silence. We do not know what this is. We do not know how our whole being is when there's a complete harmony between the nervous, the muscular, and the glandular systems. So the biological and psychological are in harmony as the mind is not functioning. In that cessation of mental activity, silence, not as an experience of the mind, but as a dimension of consciousness, comes to life. Energy gathered unto its original source or fountainhead in all the intensity and depth starts functioning then. At present, the energy in its totality has no opportunity to function, since all the time the ego is dividing it, pulling it, pushing it, attracting it in so many directions. We do not know how the totality of energy can move and what happens when it moves in its totality. That's what happens when mental action ceases to be. When there's a thought floating on the consciousness, it not only divides energy but distracts your attention. In the state of meditation, when mind ceases to function, there is no distraction. Your attention is not focused on any particular point, so there's a state of all-inclusive attention. Wherever you may be, you're capable of perceiving the totality of a fact without any conscious effort. At present, we're not capable of perceiving the totality of any fact because the mind has chosen. The moments the eyes perceive, the likes and dislikes come up, the preferences and prejudices come up. Before the intelligence has perceived the totality of a fact, the ego has made his choice, compared the given fact with something else, arrived at a decision, and either selected it or rejected it. Thus, the experience cannot be a total experience. The perception cannot be a total perception as long as the ego moves. There is no simple observation of a total fact. We have to learn that art of simple total observation of a whole fact. We see only the fragment of a fact. Mind is eager, craving to react. So before the totality is taken notice of, mind has already reacted. That reaction becomes the inhibition of perception. It inhibits the perception. It inhibits the response. In both ways, you cannot move. You're carried on the momentum of the reaction of the ego. Thus, the reaction of the ego distorts the perception and inhibits the response. In the silence of the mind, in the silence of the ego, you are in an all-inclusive state. There is a simple observation of a total fact. The response does not become one-sided. The response is not inhibited by your past knowledge and memory. It is spontaneous. So the fourth point is, spontaneity of response is possible only in the silence of mind, not before. Then you may travel in various countries, absolutely new conditions and new ways of life for you, and yet you are not in a hurry to judge them. At present the mind comes up and says, oh, he's an American, he's a Russian, we know he's German. So before you've understood the person, your mind has judged him. The word Russian, the word German, according to the knowledge and experience, has a limited content. And that content of knowledge becomes the frontier beyond which I cannot move. So my response is not to the human being, but to a Russian, to a German, to a communist, to a Catholic, and so on. I do not really meet any human being as long as my perceptions are colored by the conditionings in which I have been brought up. That's why we're living side by side, but not together. All the countries live side by side. Space is shrinking and time is reduced to really nothingness by the advances in science and technology. But the human mind is tethered to worn-out theories and concepts about one another's cultures and to the patterns of reactions to those cultures. So we do not meet one another. We are merely coexisting. In the international organizations, we sit around the tables trying to protect the vested interests of our nations, whether it's the colored people or the white people. They may create compulsions on the basis of majority and try to create political and economic compulsions for the rest of the world. That's not going to solve the problem. The racial consciousness, the commitment to ideologies, the commitment to the theory of national sovereignty. We owe allegiance to all such worn-out, outmoded theories, concepts, and notions. And we're living in an age of space travel, an age of computers and electronics. What's the use of traveling from here to Japan in 10 hours while the mind is somewhere in the 19th century? So I really do not see anything, and I do not meet anyone. And it seems to me that man cannot have peace as long as he's living with this worn-out mind, individually and collectively, living in and through the symbols which have lost relevance to the facts of life in this devastatingly new context of life. Now the lady asks, how do you do it? How do you do it in practice? One does not practice anything. When one realizes that whatever the mind does is not really something original, that it is only a reaction and not an action, this very understanding will do something to me. If I only take it as an idea newly brought up, then I will fall back in the trap of the mind. I will bring home a new idea, store it in a memory, and try to approximate my action to it. But if one sees in one's own life the truth of this, that every mental action is a mechanistic action, cerebral activity is a fragment of human life, not the totality of it, and that there's much more to the human psyche than these hitherto explored parts. The first result will be, will it not, that one is set free of all the vanity and pride of one's thoughts and emotions, norms and standards and valuations of life. These are closer to us than our skins, this psychological structure, this defense mechanism that the ego has constructed of thoughts and emotions. It's a thick thing, closer to us than the skin. The identification with that layer will come to an end when one sees the real nature of mentation. One is no longer proud of thoughts. One does not brag about thoughts, standards, and norms. So there is a freedom. A kind of new energy comes up with this realization, if it is not an academic or intellectual appreciation, but a real understanding that in whichever direction the mind moves, it is a reaction. Mind cannot act without compulsion, outward or inward. So mental action is a reaction. When one sees that, then you look at your wife or your husband at the beginning of the day in humility. You don't have the vanity to say, oh, I know him, he has done this yesterday, he has done that a week before, so I know how he's going to act the day after tomorrow. You do not have the screen of your experience before you. You do not have the image of your husband or your wife that you have created out of memory and project that image on him, put a mask of your evaluation on his face, and then look at that mask. That's what we do when we look at one another. We have images. This mind, this image-making factory, is busy the whole day long, creating images of others and of ourselves. All those masks fall away without your conscious effort. They do fall away if you're interested in discovering the truth of life, the meaning of life, and in living. Not living second-hand, passively following the patterns of behavior created for you by others, but discovering the way to live first-hand, originally, creatively. So when the day begins at the dawn, when you look at your son, your daughter, your husband, your wife, you will feel that you've never met that person before. There's a freshness about the feeling. There's a freshness in the very glance. There's a humility to look at the other person and to listen to him. We don't look at each other. We don't listen to each other. Because the moment the other person opens his mouth and utters a word, we're busy with the word and the association that that word brings up. The person is brushed aside. He's out of our focus, you see. The focus is somewhere else. But when we have the humility to say, perhaps I do not understand what he says. Let me find out. Then relationship will have a real meaning. Then relationships will have charm, some charm, grace and beauty. Thus, a new quality of humility is experienced by us. You know, in the state of all-inclusive attention, the very perception of a total fact awakens humility. It's not an ego-centered activity. Look how these are radically different dimensions. One is an ego-centered activity, and the other is silence. Humility is the flame of that silence which has come to life. In the light of that humility, your steps move. You look to another afresh. Supposing the other person says something which is silly, which is stupid, immediately the ego will bring up anger. That's the only way. All the knowledge and experience reduced to certain chemicals stored in your brain cells is bound to bring up that emotion of anger, jealousy, or greed. It will come up, but instead of fighting against that, instead of trying to suppress or repress that, hide or cover it up or destroy it, instead of wasting energy in any of these directions, the revolutionary person who is trying to discover a new dimension of awareness says, now I see the word that was spoken by the other person, and I see the emotion being brought up by the ego. He has seen now the totality. The fact and the reaction, the subjective and the objective are seen. So the perspective is neither objective nor subjective exclusively, but it is a perspective in which both the subjective and the objective are blended together. It is an all-comprehensive perspective. He sees the anger, he sees the jealousy. He had not seen these things before. The moment anger comes up, I say, I am angry, and act out of that anger. Or, I'm jealous, and act out of that jealousy. We see it, we identify with it, we act out of it. That is the way we have been living up until now. That is the way we have been living up until now. But when you look at it, your anger exposed to the light of all-inclusive attention loses its hold on you. It gets a grip on you the moment you identify yourself with the anger and say, I am angry. Then anger creates chemical compulsions in your body, which rushes up to your head so many things. But when you're not identifying, it cannot have its grip on the totality of your being. It cannot have a chemical reaction on you. If one is not in a state of meditation, it will immediately change the whole chemistry of the body temporarily. Don't you know how persons who get angry can become temporarily insane? If you take the words of an angry man to be truly representative of his nature, you will be doing injustice to the man or the woman, whoever it is. Because the person loses the poise, the balance, and anyway the margin line, the boundary line between sanity and insanity in all of us is so unsteady. We can very easily move from one to the other. Under anger, one who lives and moves as if under the pressure of temporary insanity. Not only emotional imbalance, it's a chemical imbalance in the whole body, and it has its aftermath. The grip of jealousy, the grip of envy, the grip of anger, these affect the chemistry of the whole body. But let's not go into that. When you're meeting people, when you're working in the office, cooking a meal at home, talking to your friends, everything that the mind brings up gets exposed to that silence, to the humility, to the all-inclusive attention. And the quality of your response changes. It gets transformed without your conscious effort to change it. That is the beauty of freedom. The inhibitions drop away. Freedom is the nature of man. All the complications that the ego weaves around you, the network of complexities and complications drop away. Simplicity is the nature of man. All the inhibitions, the layers of complications around us wither away in meditation. So when you ask me, how does one do it? I say it needs alertness, to be on our toes all the time, to watch what the mind brings up and how we identify ourselves with it, how every movement of ours becomes a movement out of slavery to that momentum. We don't have to create freedom. We don't have to create silence. It is there. One has only to observe. Well, one could go into such details for hours. It's not only in being related to people that it happens. When you take your meals, for example, your relationship to every morsel of food changes. You're trying to understand the relationship of that food, the quantity, the quality, to the whole being. When you're eating, you're eating. You're not gulping things down or nibbling them and thinking about something else, neither doing justice to the food or justice to the memory. But man has lost the charm and beauty of living totally every moment of his life. We pass through half-lived experiences, half-hearted movements. The challenges of life are half met and half resolved. So challenges unmet or tensions unresolved go down to the subconscious and torture you at night in the form of dreams and intimations. Every experience which is not lived totally leaves a segment which goes to the subconscious. It may either project itself into dreams through some intimations, or if the pressure is tremendous, it will create drives and passions which are inexplicable to any rational mind. This fragmentation of attention is the real curse. Fragmentation of attention, which is caused by the ego, is the breeding ground for all misery and sorrow in life. Transcendence from psyche is the byproduct of understanding the real nature of mental action. Later someone says, then would you say that you are not in a state of meditation when your mind is active? She says, that's right. And this mind which has been evolved, this beautiful psychological structure which has been cultivated, refined and enriched in untold bygone centuries, man needs to use this in science, in technology, in engineering, in medicine. One is using it, and the talents of the mind which have given so many things to human life, culture and civilization. I mean, science and technology would have been impossible if man had not evolved the capacity of creating symbols and using them for communication, creating those beautiful symbols, the numbers, you see, the mathematical numbers, for example, 1, 2, 3, 4, they're symbols. And the relationship thousands of years ago was arbitrarily decided between 1 and 1. 1 plus 1 is equal to 2. 2 plus 3 is equal to 5. All of these arbitrarily decided by man. But the whole of mathematics, algebra, geometry, trigonometry, all of these would have been impossible without symbols. And so are these symbols. So the words through which we are communicating with one another, they too are necessary. But man mistakes the symbols to be the reality. The symbol, the word, is not the thing. That's what I'm trying to say. And now man is getting stuck up with the symbols to such an extent that he's forgetting that there's life, the reality, which is to be lived, which should not be forgotten. He's so busy with symbols, forgetting life and living. This mind will have to be used in its own limited sphere, intelligently, sanely, and we will have to keep it in a healthy condition to use. But in human relationship, to use mind, which is only capable of mechanistic action, in human relationship to rely on knowledge and memory, to rely on the past and the known, which is again limited by the geographical territory, the religious denominations, the race, and so on, to rely on that seems to be unrelated to the facts today. It's a global human family, a new way of living with one another. Somebody says, yes, but can you communicate with another person in this state of meditation if, as you say, your mind must be completely empty in order to attain a state of meditation? Can you be in a state of meditation all the time in your everyday life? And her response is, can you be in youth all the time? When one grows into youth, one's there. In the same way, meditation, which is a state of all-inclusive attention, meditation, which is a state of spontaneity, it becomes a dimension of your life, you see. So, when you perceive the mental action coming up, when you perceive the momentum of the subconscious, you do not identify with it. Man becomes limited when he identifies himself with the ego, with a structure. When he does not identify, then the nature of the quality of the response will be transformed. And later a questioner asks, I think you've already explained it, but I don't seem to have a hold on it. If one could operate without the mind, can you describe a little bit more about what happens, or on what level? Is it feeling, or intuition, or just observation? I'm sure you said it, but still I'm lost. Vimala, no, one does not operate. In the silence of mental activity, there is not one, no person to operate. The me, the I consciousness isn't there. Even the word I and the whole I consciousness is a social convenience to distinguish one person from another. A name is given and a pattern of behavior is fed into that person. Now that person identifies himself or herself with a name and a pattern of behavior. The I, the ego, is really a myth. It's like a unit of time. You have a minute, an hour, a day, a week. Weeks do not exist, nor do years exist. Minutes do not exist, nor do hours exist. It's an invention of the human mind, dividing time into seconds, minutes, hours, days, weeks, and years. It's the yardstick with which we're measuring eternity. And those who mistake the yardstick for eternity are again victims of the psychological time. They carry the burden of yesterdays and the burden of tomorrows, which do not exist. Neither yesterdays nor tomorrows exist, but they carry the burden of both, the burden of dreams and the burden of memories. So time, the unit of time, is really a social convenience for collective relationships. In the same way, what you call I, you, she, he, these are man-made symbols for social convenience, for collective relationships. They're not reality. So in meditation, one does not operate. If one operates, if the I operates, it will have to operate through the psychological defense mechanism. The animal has the instinct for self-preservation and it acts. The instinct for self-preservation carried over to the psychological structure becomes the ego, and you act through there. That's what we've been doing, individually and collectively. Now, when that whole thing is in abeyance, the totality of mind ceases to function, then freedom becomes alive. A mature human being is born, a human being worth the name. He has no hangover of the animal instincts and drives. Mind is a great mischief maker. It is better that each one arrives there and discovers for himself what is the content, rather than one person trying to describe it for others. It would be too presumptuous for me to do so. It's not easy, but it is not impossible. You may describe outer fringes of the thing, but it does damage both to the speaker and the listener. The speaker feels that he can describe it for others and tell others what is there, so the ego gets tickled. And the listener feels, here I know it is so. And that is how out of the simple words of liberated people, authority is created by masses of people. You have your guru and I have mine. The quality of my master's life and your master's life is compared, adding more misery to the already existing misery. It's enough for all of us, the misery in which we're living, isn't it? One thing I've taken care of, never to describe what happens in the state of freedom. And here, these last two paragraphs of the book, Truth and Actuality. Krishnamurti. What is the unifying factor in meditation? Because that is one of the most necessary and urgent things. Politicians are not going to bring this unity, however much they may talk about it. It has taken them thousands of years just to meet each other. What is that factor? We're talking about a totally different kind of energy, which is not the movement of thought with its own energy. And will that energy, which is not the energy of thought, bring about this unity? For God's sakes, this is your problem, isn't it? Unity between you and your wife or husband, unity between you and another. You see, we have tried to bring about this unity. Thought sees the necessity of unity and therefore has created a center. As the sun is the center of this world, holding all things in that light, so this center created by thought hopes to bring mankind together. Great conquerors, great warriors have tried to do this through bloodshed. Religions have tried to do it and have brought about more division with their cruelty, with their wars, with their torture. Science has inquired into this, and because science is the accumulation of knowledge, and the movement of knowledge is thought, being fragmentary, it cannot unify. Is there an energy which will bring about this unity, this unification of mankind? We're saying in meditation this energy comes about because in meditation there is no center. The center is created by thought, but something else totally different takes place, which is compassion. That is the unifying factor of mankind. To be, not to become compassionate. That's again another deception. To be compassionate. That can only take place when there's no center. The center being that which has been created by thought. Thought which hopes that by creating a center, it can bring about unity, like a fragmentary government, like a dictatorship, like autocracy. All those are centers hoping to create unity. All those have failed, and they will inevitably fail. There's only one factor, And that is the sense of great compassion. And that compassion is when we understand the full width and depth of suffering. That is why we talked a great deal about suffering. The suffering not only of a human being, but the collective suffering of mankind. Don't understand it verbally or intellectually, but somewhere else, in your heart, feel the thing. And as you are the world and the world is you, if there is this birth of compassion, you will inevitably bring about unity. You can't help it. We will end here for today.